Hello, and welcome to a wrap up. A wrap up that has quite the range to it. A lot of new releases, some poetry, some classic fiction, crime, all kinds of jazz going on. Also, a very mixed month. I'll be very intrigued to see how people react to this wrap up because I feel like this is possibly the most eclectic, weirdo selection that I've ever put together. But what are you going to do? That's what's happened. So, firstly, if you do enjoy me being a weirdo, please do like, please do subscribe, and let's just get into it. Uh, to begin with, I read the poetry of Alexander Pushkin. If that doesn't set the tone, I don't know what does. I got this when I was in Kelowna with Grace. Grace has a nice vlog of it. I've done a book haul of it. But I talked about it a little there. I gave this 4.5 stars. I absolutely adored Pushkin's poetry. Ranges, like you've got lyrical poems, you've got like kind of narrative poems. There's some plays in here, like one act plays. You know, like this is pure romantic era. So it's this hyperfixation on nature and the landscape around them and love and beauty. And then also mixed in with that is this feeling of brutality and the danger that can like happen like one of the poems is this contrast between the description of like the landscape and everything as an arrow tipped in poison is arcing through the sky, and it's like the kind of butting heads, the duality of those two images perfectly sums up what I loved about Pushkin. It wasn't a kind of one narrow lens. There's such a vastness to what he was doing in all of these works that I 100% recommend picking up Pushkin and just reading a couple of poems here and there. Next up, I read the only book I've read this year so far for this year's Booker Prize list, and that's My Friends by Hassam Matar, which didn't make the shortlist. I was very surprised it didn't make the shortlist, honestly, after reading it. Then again, I suppose I can't really say anything because I haven't read the others. But I gave this 4.25 stars. I thought it was exceptionally good. This follows Khalid, who is a person who has moved from Benghazi to the UK, and it chronicles their life. It's him. In the book is kind of told from the perspective of the future, reflecting on the past. And essentially, he is this passive character, this character with no agency, no kind of self anything. Like, and it's about how his friends influence how he acts and what he thinks and how he moves around the world and how he's kind of drawn into affairs that then affects his life irrevocably. I've seen a lot of people give negative reviews or very mid reviews to this book, saying that they found the middle to be extremely laborious and slow because you are following a character who has absolutely no direction. He is at the whim and mercy of whatever is happening, really. But for me, I loved that. I think it comes down to if you are into that character, then you're into it and you're gonna enjoy it. Personally, I found that mainly it comes down to him having two friends and they're kind of polar opposites. One is someone who is very impassioned and outraged, and the other one is quite reclusive and is quite submissive and doesn't want to cause any problems. And you find that our main character is kind of caught between these two poles, and as a result, that's what makes him so passive. He finds himself caught between these two extremes, and as a result, finds an inflexibility where he can't operate. You're following a character who has grown up under the shadow of Gaddafi rule, who this book focuses on this idea of feeling like you're constantly being monitored and surveilled, and this feeling that you are never truly free. And so he goes towards what should be freedom, and as a result ends up caught between this idea of Western and Eastern ideas of freedom and surveillance, etc. That Yeah, I thought it was a stellar book. I thought everything it did exceptionally well. I do say like the reason it's 4.25 stars is I just didn't feel that overwhelming love, that feeling. I appreciate it a lot, but because of the nature it is told, it stopped me fully kind of seeping into it. But maybe I'm in the minority here, but I thought it was brilliant. Next up is the first of new releases. I got two new releases this month. I was very kindly given e-arcs from NetGalley, and I read them and reviewed them, and I liked both well enough that I bought them both physically, despite hardbacks in Canada being the fucking most expensive thing. It's more expensive than buying a house or some shit. It's crazy. It's City in Glass. The City in Glass by Nevo, the new novella. Nevo has done the Singing Hill cycle, did the Siren Queen, all that kind of stuff. I am a fan of Nevo's writing. When I saw the City in Glass was coming out, this fantasy novella, I was like, immediately request on NetGalley, because these are so hard to justify the price of, because it's fucking 33 Canadian dollars, 25 US dollars. That is so expensive for a goddamn novella. It's crazy. It's criminal. Like, I think there's a big conversation to be had around the problem of publishers looking to decrease page size, like page numbers, but then also looking to increase price. There has to be a way to kind of do something around this, because you can only get novellas in hardbacks. It is such a vile business practice that you essentially have some of the freshest and most creative new fantasy writers. The only way you can get them physically is in hardback novellas, and it's like you need to introduce a more affordable way to be able to get these novellas. It's horrific to me. Like they're doing with Murderbot, actually. They're doing two in one and they're releasing them in paperback. But that's only because they know how expensive it is, and they know that people will want to buy them because there's going to be an adaptation. So they're willing to do it for that, because they know that they'll recoup, that there'll be such a surge of people interested that won't want to commit to paying a fucking ludicrous amount on all of these novellas. So they apply a more affordable method, which means that will still make them money, which means they know that it's a viable business strategy. And I hope it's something they do moving forwards, because otherwise it's fucking sickening. And that's my spiel over on novellas. Nevertheless, I really loved this novella. Nevo has such a wonderful writing style that changes from it. She's very amorphous. She can really float around with how she writes. Like Singing Hill Cycle, very tale orientated. And then this is still that, but it's very personal. It's the story of the city of Azrael, this kind of grandiose city which has a demon inside of it, Vitrine. And Vitrine is our main character. She's the person that we view this story from. And the first chapter kind of has Vitrine walking through the city, enjoying just her experience of walking through and knowing people and knowing how she's affecting things and how she is driving the path of this city. And then at the end of that chapter, the angels arrive and they utterly destroy the entire city. They blast it to pieces, and it's such a kind of horrific scene. And of course, like, angels were constantly destroying shit in the Bible and everything, and or angels in pretty much any religious text have these moments of destruction. The rest of the book is essentially Vitrine trying to put together this city again, and it's really wonderful. It's written through this narrative style where, because the demon lives so long, it's like we follow spans of time. We're watching like grand steps in this society's life, but we're watching it in such a short span of time, but it never feels like things are being rushed. It feels like the natural ebb and flow of this society from what's been set up in terms of what Vitrine's doing and what's at hand and who's involved and everything. And there's Sandman kind of vibes to it, where she's choosing specific people, and those people, she influences their life, much like happens in Sandman. There's a lot of things going on that I really, really enjoyed. At the center of the book, it's the relationship between Vitrine and an angel that was there at the destruction of the city. And Vitrine kind of marks this angel. And as a result, it's about how they both change and morph and how they grow and shrink based on this destruction and the shared memory of either the action or the inaction they took during that destruction. I think it was a really fantastic novella. Nevo is a guaranteed hit. There's a reason that I probably would have bought this even if I hadn't got an E-Arc, and that is simply that she is just a guaranteed writer. She puts nothing but bangers out. They could be fluctuating levels of bangers, but no matter what, I leave them thoroughly happy with what I read. And I don't actually physically own Nevo book. The Singing Hill Cycle, you can only get the first book in paperback, and then the rest are only in hardback because of publishers' fucking greed. And so I don't have those. I haven't bought them. I actually don't think either of the first two are available in paperback. So you've got this fucking ugly discrepancy. It makes me sick. And then at the same time, I didn't buy Siren Queen or anything because I just haven't wanted to read it yet. So, but this one definitely called to me a lot more. And so I now own a Nevo book physically. I feel like I have done my duty as a fan. Next up, we go into a little bit of a dip here in terms of enjoyment, because I read the Poetry of Emily Dickinson and I gave it 2.75 stars. And I feel like a lot of you are going to react to that have read Emily Dickinson and be like, what the fuck are you talking about? How could you? And I was so looking forward to reading Emily Dickinson. The problem is, from what I've read, this collection just fucking sucks. It's formatted poorly. It has a really bad selection of her poems from the sounds of it. Like, a lot of the reviews for this specific edition are kind of like, it's missing some of the most famous ones. And as a result, I read a lot of them just banally, just really, they're so short, so flippant, they don't really have anything to them. And then there's the standouts, these brilliant ones. But most of them are just these little stanzas to themselves of just of nothing to me personally. So that was a really big shame. Next up, continuing my reading Virginia Woolf's entire bibliography, I read her third novel, Jacob's Room. I gave this 2.5 stars. It's my least favourite so far out of the three. Mine still goes Night and Day the best, then The Voyage Out, and now Jacob's Room. And that's purely because when you know where she's going in terms of her style, in terms of stream of consciousness and these other methods of modernism, and the examination and everything, Jacob's Room is like the Frankenstein's first attempt at that. It's this kind of mangled, crazy, all over the place, wild reading experience where essentially you're following Jacob, you're following Jacob's life, but you never really get an idea of who Jacob is. Instead, you're picking up images of the people in his life and the people around him and what they think of him and what he thinks of them. And it's this kind of creation of a portrait of every person based on what the other people think of them. So even though you are in all of these people's thoughts, you never get a look into themselves through that. You only get to view other people, which is a really interesting concept. This idea of that no one really knows who they are. They only create images for what other people are. But it's told in such a way where the stream of consciousness isn't quite settled yet. And so rather than this kind of feeling of a stream, rather than this flowing sense of into one person, out of them, into another, etc. This feeling of head hopping. But that's the thing. Head hopping creates the image of kind of like jagged, you've done that, like you've jumped, whereas a stream is very much flowed. And I think she gets to this feeling of a flowing nature, whereas this is very head hoppy. This is a jagged, we're in this person, now we're in this person, and sometimes you don't realise it's happened, and massive bits go by where you're like, who am I thinking about right now? What is going on? And I just don't think it came together as well as, once again, unfortunately, because I've read Mrs. Dalloway does that whole concept much, much better. So 2.5 is unfortunately what it has to be. My second new release of the month actually comes out today as I record this. Both The City in Glass and The Great Wen, spoiler alert, The Great Wen by Alan Moore, they both come out today, the 1st of October. For some reason, my local store was selling it a week ago, so I was able to pick them up quite happily. The Great Wen by Alan Moore is the most batshit crazy book I have read in a long time, and I loved it for that, even though it was baffling. As you can see, quite a small, about 350 pages or something, I think. Yeah, 311 pages. Really quite short, but it is the slowest paced, most verbose, needlessly wordy, just incomprehensible nonsense I've ever read at points. And I loved it for it. I gave it 4 stars. I could not give it more than 4 stars. I'm going to tell you the opening and then we'll get into the actual plot. Because the opening of this book is genuinely some of the most incomprehensible nonsense. You have to adapt to not only Alan Moore's crazily verbose writing style. The guy swallowed a thesaurus and is just vomiting it all over the page, and there's going to be a lot of people who absolutely despise the book for that. If you do not like wordy books, if you do not like feeling the author's just trying to be smart, stay away from this book. You will despise it. Genuinely, I don't know who I'm recommending this book to, other than fucking mad nutters. And so the beginning of the book, you're adapting to that, and you're also having these snapshots, these visions of these gods existing through London. So you've got like the kind of god of riots, and it's never made clear, but you're just kind of like you're following a perspective, and it's all this crazy stuff happening and all this bizarre imagery, and then also there's a 9-foot woman walking around and all of this stuff, and none of it makes sense, and you're jumping all over the place. And you're in post-World War II London, and it's all fucking weird. And it's just baffling. Like, I feel like no matter how much I explain it, I'm never going to be able to convey just how bizarre the opening is. And so, when you get to the actual plot, it feels like a breath of fresh air. It feels like you've got your first big mouthful of air after drowning. The book settles down. It settles down into Dennis Knuckleyard, who is this young man working in Coffin Ada's bookshop. And he's kind of this know-nothing kid who has a couple of friends, doesn't really have anything going on. Pretty much the only thing you know about him is that he's masturbating over a magazine that he has, and he works in this bookstore, and that's it. He's kind of just a wet wipe. And Coffin Ada sends him out one day to go buy a box of books. It's books by the author Machen, who is a real author. And it's kind of like, go pick these up. It's a job lot. Try to get this much out of him. Try to get it for, I'm going to give you 20 quid, but try to get it for 15. If you do, you get to keep the change. Like, that's your kind of incentive. And so he goes over there, and he's going through the box and everything, and he's trying to act smart, and he's trying to get along with the guy, and he's trying to put across this facade that he knows what he's talking about. And then he picks up a book, and the book is not on the list. It is a random book that is not on the list of books that should be in this box. And he's like, what is this book type thing? And the guy's like, a £5. You can have £5 for the lot. And he's like, whoa, I may or may not be an entrepreneurial genius, deal. And so he takes them all, keeps the change and everything, leaves. And what happens is that this book that has turned up in the job lot, is a fictional book inside of Machen's short story N, which is a real short story. And what happens is that he becomes involved where that bookseller that sold him the box is murdered. And he realizes that people are after this book, and it turns out that the Great Wen is this alternate reality London where filled with the concepts created by humans, imaginary works inside of books, images, etc. All of these crazy things, all of these thoughts and like feelings and all these things put into an actual form. They're anthropomorphized everything, and yes, essentially his job is to return the book that is the fictional book from the real short story Maction's N to the Great Wen and give it back before he is captured and murdered. And it becomes this post-World War II crime novel about him trying to get a book back to the other world. And it's told in the most bizarre way with all kinds of weird imagery, weird characters. It's got historical figures inside of it that turn up who are from this other world, and it's got it's written as if it's in the time, so it's got some very coarse language, to say the least, some slurs, etc. So it's very Alan Moore coded, and it is fucking brilliant. Like, it's one of those books that I finished it and I'm like, this is a fucking book. You know what I mean? Like, I finished it and I was like, this is why we create stories. It's so a madman can just be let loose and he can create the most bizarre, fresh, newest bunch of nonsense to ever grace God's green earth. And it balances this humour, this genuine level of research and respect and appreciation, this darkness of the time, and it blends it all in a way where I was just mesmerised. Every time I picked it up, I was reading it so slowly because it's so unapproachable, but I could not stop reading because it was just evocatively bananas. It's gonna be a 5-book series, and I'm planning on reading all of them right now because genuinely, Alan Moore is just one of the greatest minds, and he's also one of the worst minds. And just putting that together is a spellbinding experience. So that is my review of The Great Wen. Try to decode what you're meant to get out of that. I have no idea. Then I read Dawnshard by Brandon Sanderson. Sorry, that's so funny. Just the idea of following The Great Wen by Alan Moore with Dawnshard. I feel like they're the antithesis of fantasy writers, most definitely. Dawnshard is the second novella in the Stormlight Archive. I greatly preferred this to Edge Dancer. I'm not going to give too many thoughts because really I just enjoyed it. I thought it was a really good read. I gave it 4 stars. It justified its page count a lot more. It had much better characters to follow, in my opinion. I really like having Ryzen have her own actual story for a longer period of time. I liked the Lopen. The Lopen did not fall into the usual flaw of just annoyingly humorous characters. He did not join that litany of villains, in my opinion. Instead, I quite enjoyed the Lopen. I enjoyed actually everything about it. I thought it introduced a really new concept to the Stormlight Archive, which was a lot of fun. It felt like there was a reason I was reading it, which with Edge Dancer I did not feel, apart from I need to introduce this change between one book and the next, and so I need to justify it, so I need to write this. Speaking of, it's going to be funny because this has a kind of Egyptomania vibe to it. That feeling of the early 20th century, late 19th century, where people were beginning to excavate and everything in Egypt, and the world lost its mind in terms of bringing like desecrating these places and bringing them all over. And this book kind of has an Egyptomania, this longing for treasure, and that's kind of what I got from it. And it mixed with the idea of, it was really interesting. I really enjoyed the first half. The second half was good, but the first half for me I really enjoyed it. So that's that. Then we have 2 Patreon picks to end the month. I read Pachinko by Min Jin Lee. I had had this book on my Kindle for about 2 years and never read it. So I was really glad when Ben recommended it, and we read it together. And Pachinko is a fascinating book because the first 65% is one of the best books I've ever read. I loved it. It is an epic historical, it's just a historical epic telling the story of a family of Koreans who move to Japan, and it deals with the oppression suffered, it deals with the war, it deals with all these different things, it deals with religion, the introduction of Christianity, it deals with gambling and this transition of human life from individual, personal, smaller scaled lives to this feeling of the world's gotten bigger, and the introduction of entertainment and addictions and how people are transforming, where now people want more and more money, and it's all to do with greed and addiction and manipulation and everything. And it was this fascinating book, and I really, really loved it. And then the last 35% feels like it probably should have either not existed or been a different book, because it feels like the author just kind of wanted to dash through it, and so the time jumps become larger, the separation between events then makes it feel like everything's happening all the time, and you never really get invested in the characters because so much is happening. And the ending of Pachinko becomes what I feared all of Pachinko could be. But the first 65% is handled with such craft and care that I was so invested all the way through, and yeah, it just petered out at the end. It felt like the author just couldn't be bothered, honestly, or like, not couldn't be bothered, but wanted to reach the end and had a place in mind, and so needed to get there. And so yeah, things started to get shortcut, and that's the way it goes. And finally, the other one is Death on the Nile, was a Patreon pick, which I've read some Agatha Christie before. I've read 2, I think. I read A Murder is Announced, and then there were none. And now I've read Death on the Nile, which was really good. I gave it 3.5 stars. I also gave Pachinko 4 stars. But I gave Death on the Nile 3.5 stars, and it was really good. It's an Agatha Christie book, so I'm not going to go into it. You know, like, a murder happens and they solve it. It's really not anything in particular. But my big problem with the book is its depiction of the indigenous people of the area of which the book is taking place, because it has a lot of imagery around this idea of like black thoughts and dark imagery and everything, and it's like also using that to describe the native people. And so when you put those two together, there's a certain image that Agatha Christie's making. And I know what you're thinking, Agatha Christie, a racist, having racist imagery, I couldn't imagine it. Surely the person who wrote a book that had to have its title changed 2 times because of the racist imagery involved in it, and then there were none. If you ever want to know what the original title was, have a look. But who would have thunk it? But once again, compelling narrative, had a few different mysteries going on, which I think makes it a much stronger book. Because honestly, I felt really proud of myself. Don't want to toot my own horn, but I guessed the central mystery about 25 pages in. I said to Grace, I was like, I think this is what's going to happen. And she's read it, so she did a good job of actually just forgetting the book, and so she couldn't tell me. But the book does a good job of deviating from certain things and making you start to doubt yourself and then believe yourself, and there's other mysteries going on that other people are implicated in, so there's always something for you to be interested in. And Hercule Poirot is a fantastic character to follow. He's a lot of fun, and really there's nothing more to say than this is an Agatha Christie book. If you've read Agatha Christie, if you have an idea of it, it's what you get in, and it's fun. That's what it is. So, they are the books I read. Quite a hodgepodge, I hope you can appreciate that. Quite a mixed month. I gave nothing 5 stars. The best thing I gave was Pushkin and the City in Glass, 4.5, and the lowest I gave was Jacob's Room and the Poetry of Emily Dickinson. So, if you did enjoy, please do like, please do subscribe, and as always, Have a nice rest of your day.